Hello, everyone. Welcome. I am torn right now because I know we have more than 300 people registered waiting for everyone to get here, but also having just met our speaker, wanting to make sure we have as much time as possible for him. So I'm going to go ahead and get started, knowing that we're going to have people jumping on probably in the next 5 or 10 minutes. So hello and welcome. I'm Heather Loglin, president of the St. Croix Valley Foundation, and I am just so happy to see all of your faces as you join us today. On behalf of the foundation and our longtime partner and sponsor, First Bank State and Trust, I am delighted to welcome you to Conversations of the Valley, a community forum of the St. Croix Valley Foundation since 2004. The mission of our foundation, the St. Croix Valley Foundation, is to enhance quality of life here in the Valley. We do that by encouraging and supporting charitable giving, by connecting people and programs, and by encouraging collaboration. And it's collaboration, that bringing together of individuals and organizations to find solutions to shared community concerns. That is what this Conversations of the Valley series is all about. Getting people together to learn, to think, to talk about how we might then respond to current and emerging issues. So the theme of this year's series is placemaking. And my guess is that the majority of you are here because you are passionate about this place we call home, the St. Croix Valley. Some of you have deep roots here. Others of you may have, like me, moved here more recently, choosing to make the Valley the place you call home. Whichever the case, and however you're connected throughout the Valley, whether broadly or whether you have a primary affiliation with one specific community, you know that what we have here is something really special. So placemaking, at our January kickoff, we heard from Dr. Catherine Loglin, the city doctor and lead consultant on the Knight Foundation's Soul of Community Research. If you missed that session, by the way, I encourage you to go online, scvfoundation.org, and find 45 minutes to an hour in your schedule to watch it. It was fantastic. Dr. Loglin really helped set the stage for this year's series by outlining 3 factors that contribute to attachment to place: aesthetics, social offerings, and being open and welcoming. She also explained how attachment to place relates to economic growth. So today's session features Smart Growth America, a nonprofit based in Washington, D.C., but working all across the country on what they call the built environment. And they define the built environment as what we build, where and how we build it, and whom we build it for. Clearly, this built environment that we're going to hear more about today has a lot to do with placemaking. So before I introduce our speaker, just a few words about today's Zoom format. To help keep things running smoothly, you'll notice we have muted all of you. We do hope to have some time for questions at the end. So if you have questions, just type them into the chat box, which you should be able to access at the bottom of your screen. And then we do suggest putting your Zoom on speaker view so that the majority of your screen is filled with our speaker and the slides he will share. If you want to see friendly faces, you can always go to gallery view to scroll through all attendees. So having done that, I am pleased to introduce John Robert Smith from Smart Growth America. John Robert is a senior policy advisor for Smart Growth America, and he chairs Transportation of America for America, which is a program of Smart Growth America. He served 16 years as mayor of Meridian, Mississippi, a city of about 40,000 people in East Central Mississippi with a history and economy built on railways and the goods transported on them. Meridian's multi-modal transportation center, which locals refer to as Union Station, was his signature project while mayor, and it's now recognized as one of the best multimodal transportation centers in the entire country. It serves not only as the hub of local and inner city transportation, but also promotes historic preservation and was the catalyst to Meridian's downtown revitalization efforts. John Robert helped further define Meridian's role as a cultural center with the restoration of the Grand Opera House of Mississippi, the creation of the Riley Education and Performing Arts Center, and the selection of Meridian as the site for the Mississippi Arts and Entertainment Experience. Smart Growth America He leads technical assistance for communities around the country on downtown revitalization, placemaking, building healthy communities, and the economic and fiscal impacts of development patterns. Phew. John Robert Smith, thank you so much for being with us today. The virtual microphone is yours.
Heather, thank you so much for that very kind introduction. And it's so good to be with all of you today. I'm sorry it's remote. I wish I were there in person, but I look forward to the opportunity to come visit the Valley region and let you show me around as a guest of the region. I will now screen share. Let's see where it is. Well, I don't see it, Raylan.
Do you want me to just go ahead and do it, John Robert? I'm not sure why it's suddenly looking gray like that.
Yeah, I suppose so. Good, thank you, Rhoda. So as I said, it's so good to be with you today, and I want to discuss with you the importance of how we build our cities. These are conscious decisions that we make. The built environment doesn't bubble up out of the ground. Next slide. So Smart Growth America, in its simplest explanation, is we believe that whoever you are, wherever you live, you deserve to live in a place that's a healthy place, that has the potential for you to prosper and for your community to be resilient, but your family also. Next. And we're comprised of many parts. I chair Transportation for America. Rayla and I work in Smart Growth America, but you see the other components here before you. And notice that we focus on land use and development, economic development, and transportation, and how that helps build thriving communities. Next. So what is smart growth? It's simply that you shape the quality of the place, and then that place shapes the lives of the people who live there. And it's not new. Next. Ever since we've been building civilization itself, we've built cities and towns in much the same way. You'll see here the street grid of ancient Pompeii. Notice the way the streets are laid out. You could walk from your home to the market. You can walk from your home to your place of work. You can even walk from your home to the arena for a day's entertainment. Now, hopefully when you got to the arena, you didn't find that you were the entertainment for the day, but that's the way we built our cities. Next. So how did we get to where we are today in this country? Next. Well, here's a Sanborn map of Hudson, Wisconsin. These were fire insurance maps, but they show the layout, the very earliest layout of cities. And here you see in Hudson, it was built on a grid system, very reflective of what you saw in the Pompeii grid. Next slide. And so in early America, we built our towns out as very walkable places. You walked out of your front door down the sidewalk, perhaps to the corner barber shop, or you walked to church. You might even walk to your place of employment, or you would jump on a streetcar and that would take you into the downtown and to your workplace, or take you to your train station, and from there you were connected to the rest of this country. Next. Well, that's how we developed in this country until something called Euclidean zoning came about when Herbert Hoover was Secretary of Commerce. Hoover decided that as we built cities, we certainly had to separate the various uses. Initially, the industrial uses would be separated for health reasons. But then we carried it even further. And as we zoned, we separated commercial from industrial, we separated residential, and then we also separated our civic structures, our schools and courthouses and city halls. And to connect these separate zoned uses, we created an arterial. And that arterial linked the four other types of use, but it required an automobile next. And so it's we are wont to do in this country, when we can build something, we can overbuild something. And so we invested in the highway system and we built convoluted spaghetti bowls of traffic complexes, as you see here. And if anyone can tell me easily how you get from this circular structure on the left side of the slide all the way over to this dark structure on the right side of the slide, you might win a prize next. And as we built out and pushed people out, because remember, the automobile was going to free us. We'd have so much time because of the automobile connecting us to these uses, and it would be a seamless way with little congestion. Well, that's what we thought. And as we built our retail, we built large shopping complexes with seas of asphalt in front of them for parking. And they had their success next, but at the expense of our once vibrant downtowns, left as vacant, empty shells all too often next. And even those big shopping complexes close. And we're seeing that even more now after COVID. And we're left with empty hulks surrounded by empty parking. And unfortunately, it has hit small town America much harder than other parts of the country next. And when we built residential, we built homes such as this on a built environment that you see here, no sidewalks, because of course, no one is intended to walk. Who lives here? What's the most prominent resident of the homes you see there? Well, it's the automobile. The garage is the largest part of that home and the most prominent. The caretakers for the automobile live in the back. And this kind of development has changed how we do even the simplest things in life next, like walking the dog. Now you can imagine the health of the gentleman in that car walking his poor dog outside. Of course, there are no sidewalks where he could safely walk that dog next. But something has changed and changed dramatically. Economic and demographic fundamentals have shifted. And in case you don't realize it, it's the youth. It's the youth, stupid. It's the new generations of the workforce that are driving both shifts next. We have moved from an agricultural economy to an industrial economy and now to a knowledge economy. And if you're an economic developer and you're still chasing smokestacks, you're going to lose, because now we have to be chasing talent next. And the good news is that that young talent, yes, 47% want to live in those large metropolitan areas that offer so much, but only 12% want to live in the cul-de-sac neighborhoods they grew up in. 40% want to live in small towns and rural places, provided they have the broadband access that connects them to the rest of the world that we all must have now. And there's a downtown with a sense of pop to it and life after 5 next. So we didn't get here by accident. We didn't have small cities with highways running through the middle and abandoned form of vibrant places. We made choices to get here, and we can make choices to get out of where many of us find ourselves next. We can make choices and build downtowns such as we see in Fairhope, Alabama. Who wouldn't want to spend an afternoon in Fairhope? Next. So let's take several case studies. First, let's talk about Oxford, Mississippi. Oxford, Mississippi is in North Mississippi. It's the home to the University of Mississippi, my alma mater. Mayor Tannehill is the mayor there. Next. And Mayor Tannehill inherited a historic downtown, but what a bleak streetscape you see there. You see City Hall in the image to the right, but you would never choose to walk along those streets, to pass time there, to meet friends there. Next. So we worked with the mayor, and the mayor designed, in working with us, a complete streets project so that, yes, the automobile has its travel way, but there are wide sidewalks and there's landscaping, and there's a sense purposefully built in that that pedestrian and the biker that's there belongs, and that they can easily access the restaurants and the shops. And the mayor began this project to keep restaurants and retail businesses open during COVID, because you could eat outside. And you know what? People found that they enjoyed eating out in the built environment because they like to watch other human beings pass by. Next. And this is the kind of vibrancy that you find in downtown Oxford today. Those streets and the environment are welcoming and beckon you out into the built environment. Next. Normal, Illinois. Normal didn't have a downtown. It was actually home to a normal college where teachers were instructed. And Mayor Chris Coos, friend of mine there, wanted to build, he needed a downtown to develop around what had been just a few stores in support of the college. Next. And so he built, it's unfair to call this a roundabout. It's much more of a circus in the British interpretation of that word. Yes, it moves vehicular traffic around a circular park in the middle, and the structure with the clock is the new transportation center and City Hall, site of government there. Next. And this kind of development right by their train station, their transit center, their government buildings draws people of all ages into this beautiful circular park right in the middle of downtown. It is creating a place that people want to be. Next. And then I want to take you to the little Irwin, Tennessee. It's up in the mountains, beautiful environment, almost in North Carolina. Irwin saw its population dwindling. Young people were not returning. They were afraid they wouldn't be able to hold the jobs that were there. They manufacture the nuclear rods for aircraft carriers, but those 500 engineers don't live in Irwin. They wanted to change that. Next, so they invested not only in broadband, because they couldn't get any of the big broadband companies to come to them. So Irwin Utilities created their own broadband network, and you can now access the internet with a cheaper cost and more rapid speeds than I have in my office in Washington, D.C. And they invested in the built environment, the sidewalks, the lighting, the landscaping, and they've seen a total reversal in downtown. And now they cannot build enough housing fast enough for some of the young engineers that are now moving in to take those jobs as the older workforce retires. Next. And then, of course, what former mayor wouldn't talk about his hometown? This is my hometown of Meridian, Mississippi, and I want to share with you some efforts we made over a period of years and how they build one success on top of the other. Meridian's on the Mississippi-Alabama border, about 43,000 people. But we're surrounded by 350,000 rural residents. And if Meridian disappeared tonight, it would have to be rebuilt in the morning, or those 350,000 people would have in Alabama and Mississippi that surround us would have to move. Next slide. So we too, when you begin to look at your community, ask yourself three questions. Who were you in the past? What were the assets that caused your community to be built in the first place? Could be natural assets next to a river, on rail lines such as Meridian is, close to certain assets like coal or the logging industry. What were those assets in the past, and are they still of value today? Who are you now? That unvarnished look at what you've become, warts and all, what's good, what must be changed. And the third question is the most important, but who do you aspire to be? Who do you tell your grandchildren this community will be when they grow up next? So Meridian 2 started on a grid pattern, as you see in this Sanborn map. Mr. Ragsdale and Mr. Ball built Meridian in the 1850s, incorporated in 1860. Again, you see that grid pattern applied next, easily walkable, mixed uses. This is the downtown of Meridian. After the Civil War, Meridian had been destroyed during the Civil War, but afterwards, German Jewish immigrants moved to Meridian because of its transportation connections to the rest of the country, and they built a European-style downtown, and the architecture they built was really quite extraordinary. Next. I'll talk a little more about the reuse of this Marx Rothenberg company in Meridian. The Marxes and the Rothenbergs had two large department stores, one in Meridian and one in downtown New York City, connected by rail. Next. And of course, our transportation, this was our historic Union Station. And we had 27 passenger trains a day and connected to 70% of the nation's population within a 2-day trip by rail out of Meridian at that time. Well, that was a vibrant Meridian at the turn of the century and well into the 20s and 30s. But then we made a series of decisions and turned our attention away from our history, away from that valuable architecture. And what we saw was our property values plummeted. Retail sales tax collections by the city were way down. Our youth were leaving Meridian in droves. You see, we turned our back on our hometown. So when I came into office, we had to have a winner. We had to drive a stake in the ground and say, no, downtown is important. Next slide. And we built the South's first multimodal transportation center, connecting passenger rail, intercity bus, connections to the two interstate highways we have, connections out to the airport. My belief being that if you get a congestion of people using a downtown site, maybe they'll buy a meal, maybe they'll shop, maybe they'll spend the night. Next. And that first project, which was not popular when it was planned, led to the restoration of the Marx Rothenberg building and the accompanying opera house you see next to it. Mississippi State University, this is their conference center. But next to that is the opera house. Next slide. And this is the fully restored interior of the opera house. Now keep in mind, the third week I was in office as mayor, the business community came to me and said, demolish the opera house. We need surface parking. Well, I told them they had the wrong man, but it took us almost 14 years. But this is the restored opera house. Next. And that drew performances from across the nation. The Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C. became so enamored with the idea that this small southern city was making the kind of investment we were in the arts, that they now send performers from the Kennedy Center down to Meridian to play. So we've had the Soweto Gospel Choir. We've had Wynton Marsalis in the Kennedy Center Orchestra, and Mr. Marsalis asked to come back 2 more times because of the near perfection of the acoustics in the theater. Itzhak Perlman playing with the Meridian Symphony Orchestra. And Hal Holbrook came on stage after performing Mark Twain Tonight and addressed the audience and said this was one of his top 2 venues to perform in because of the intimacy of the theater. Next. Well, that kind of investment and focus on the arts allowed Meridian to be chosen as the home of the Mississippi Art and Entertainment Experience. You see, we believe that Mississippi produces more artistic genius per capita than any state in the Union. Think about it. Father of rock and roll, father of the blues, father of country music. You can't study 20th century American lit without studying almost exclusively Mississippi authors. William Faulkner, Shelby Foote, Tennessee Williams, the list goes on. What is important about this is it tells the artistic, creative experience. It's not just things behind glass. It's how the arts are inspired by literally the air we breathe and the environment that surrounds us. And we tell it right downtown, next to the transportation center, 2 blocks from the Opera House, because not only do I want you to come to Meridian and see that, I want my own grandchildren to understand the promise of the arts that is bubbled up out of oftentimes a tumultuous history. Next. And when you have that vibrancy in the downtown, then people begin to invest in the other historic structures. This is the Rosenbaum building, condominiums, top floor, $500,000 a piece, unfinished space for a condominium in Meridian, Mississippi. No one would have believed it possible. Next. But it's also market rate apartments that are built in the downtown. And when that happens, you have suddenly Meridian doesn't die at 5, it has life at 5. And you have your art galleries, and you have your restaurants and your bars that open, and you have young people that are moving in and through the downtown in the evening. And it gives you such hope and promise. Next. And this leads to what is now a penultimate project in downtown Meridian. It's one I started, but I wasn't in office when it was opened. It was opened just this year. This was an Art Deco 15-story office building called the 3-Foot Building, built by, again, German Jewish immigrants whose name was Dreyfus, but they anglicized to 3-Foot. And this is the Marriott 3-Foot, a marquee property for the Marriott chain in the downtown. And to see the wealth of people coming and going, this is right across the street from the Opera House. Now you can spend not an afternoon, but a full weekend to see things in Meridian. And what is so important is the people of Meridian themselves have embraced this vision and this future. Now, I said I wasn't here when this opened. You see, the things I've shared with you, whether it was in Oxford or Normal or Irwin or Meridian, are not accomplished in a 4-year term in office. They're not even accomplished in 20 years. So your vision you create has to be a vision that will outlast you. And that is so hard to sustain. But for me, I find it easy to care about the future because I have 4 grandsons now. They differ in age from 16 to 1.5. And those 2 older boys, when they were little, and I would come to visit them, They loved to pile in bed with me at night, and they wanted to hear me read stories, but they really preferred if I would tell them stories. They wanted me to share the stories my grandmother shared with me about Aunt Allie and the wildcat, or the stories of the wild man of Lost Gap. Then they wanted to hear what it was like when I was a boy. And they'd laugh at the notion of a phone with a cord on it. But they'd be jealous of being able to walk down to the corner drugstore and buy a malted milkshake. One night before the youngest one dozed off to sleep, he turned to me, and they called me Paka, turned to me and he said, "Paka, what's it going to be like when I get big?" You see, that's what keeps me focused on the future. What's it going to be like when he gets big? You see, the decisions we make today in large measure shape what that future will be like for that little boy and the boys and girls across this country that are your children or grandchildren and live in your hometowns. You see, we may not be there to finish the vision, but I believe we are obligated to begin. Thank you, and I will be happy to answer questions.
Thank you so much, John Robert. So if you have questions, please go ahead and put them into chat, and we will do our best to relay them in an organized fashion. I would love to start by asking, I'm guessing that many of you, as you watch some of those beautiful photos, in your mind was also what was in my mind, which was, wow, even if you can get people together around a vision, that's a lot of money. So I would love to hear from you a bit, John Robert, about how you, when you were bringing people together, how you made the case really for this investment in a longer term result, and what resources and data you leaned on, you know, how you built consensus around, yes, this is the right investment to make when there are so many other places that a community could be choosing to put its dollars.
And of course, communities have to balance those challenging decisions that they have to make. But you know, a community isn't defined by the gas station on the highway. The community is defined by that heart and soul of its architecture that's been with you over time, that really defines who you are. So we had partners in the financing of these projects. For Union Station, the federal government was offering what they called transportation enhancement funds, and you could use them on a train station. So I enhanced the heck out of what was left of our station. And working with Mississippi DOT, they didn't have others who applied for that, and I felt it was my obligation to relieve them of all of that funding that they had and didn't know what to do with. But that project was not, I was not at the head of a vast army. I was sued twice over that project. It was used against me in 3 elections, but none of that was successful. We won both lawsuits. I was able to serve 4 terms and you know, leave to come to DC of my own choosing. But the people gave me enough leash to do that first project. And with the success of that first project, then it was easier to move towards the Opera House. And that we had a local foundation that put up 17 million. And you play the assets you have. I had the business community, as I said, wanted it demolished. In Meridian, you need the business community and or the ministerial alliance, because my community was, when I was mayor, was 65% African-American. And the ministerial alliance holds great sway. And the ministerial alliance said the Opera House didn't mean anything to them, demolish it. Well, I remembered an elderly woman I had met named Miss Emma, who had told me about being what she called a missy girl when she had her first date to the Opera House. You see, the Opera House in Meridian was one of the few public performance venues of its day open to African-American audiences. Yes, separated by balcony, but open to the same experience. And Miss Emma, as a young African-American teenage girl, went with her boyfriend, and she said she saw Black Patty, who was a African-American vaudeville star of great renown of her day and a soprano of literally world renown. And she went to see that and she saw such wonderful things. And I asked her if she'd go with me to talk to the Ministerial Alliance. And she said she would. And I set Miss Emma there and she told them the stories of what the Opera House meant to her. And when she got ready to leave, the head of the alliance said, "Now, Miss Emma, we're going to think about what you said." And she turned and smiled sweetly. And she said, "No, Reverend, you pray about it." I had full support for the Opera House after that. So you play those assets, and then Celia Ward, a movie star, television star, you may know, she's from Meridian. She's a good friend of mine. When it came time to visit Trent Lott and Thad Cochran to seek some federal support, or to visit the Riley Foundation, the gentleman on the board there, I took Celia with me because they'll listen to Celia perhaps a lot more than they might listen to me. So you begin to build on your successes, and then all of a sudden the public gets it. I didn't show the city hall, but I had a lady who had always fussed at me about closing city streets for events and spending money on things like the city hall, until she made her first trip to Washington, D.C. And I had left office by then, and she saw me in town and stopped me and said, "I want to talk to you about the city hall restoration." And I wanted to say, I'm not in office, I don't have to do this anymore, but I listened. And she said, I went to Washington, I saw those buildings and I was so proud. And then she said, it hit me. That's what you're doing for us with the city hall. So it begins to build and take a life of its own.
Great, thank you. We have a couple questions about seniors and building communities that are good places for older adults. You started by talking, or at one point in your remarks, you mentioned that some of this is being driven by what millennials want, what younger workers want. How does this play out? How do you engage and make sure that we are also building communities that work well for older adults?
Well, being one myself, in Meridian, was certainly an aging community when we started, but the city structure, the built environment, sidewalks, safe crosswalks, safe bike lanes, good for children and young adults, but especially good for seniors as we might move more slowly, as we need to be connected to not only fresh groceries, but entertainment also. And we don't want to drive anymore. We don't want to battle the traffic anymore. So how do we get around? So there is a strong emphasis on connecting little children to school by safe sidewalks leading to schools, but seniors to healthcare by transit, to the churches, because church, as you're a senior, becomes more and more your center point of gathering, at least back in Mississippi. And so you don't want to take that one social connection and event from them. So we need that. The built environment encourages all of that. And yeah, I see some of the questions about widening rights of ways. And yes, don't let state DOTs tell you that you cannot add safe crosswalks or even bike lanes to even state infrastructure. You can do that. And in fact, federal DOT wants you to do those things. I would point you to Whitefish, Montana, one of the first tiger projects in the country. And they took a highway through the downtown it's still a highway, but now it is a walkable highway. It's safe to cross. It looks very much like a main street, which it is to Whitefish.
Thank you. So there's a couple questions about kind of engaging diverse stakeholders. And I think about, you've talked about the importance history has played in the towns you've worked with. I think about our last speaker, the city doctor, and one of the things that stuck with me from her remarks was the insistence on being truthful, that you want to be truthful about your community and make it a better place, and that you'll attract the people for whom it is a good place. How do we balance that with the awareness that the demographics of our region are changing and that we should be building a community that's ready to be good for the folks who are going to live here in 10, 20, 50 years, and they might look different. So how do you both honor the people who are currently in the city, the history of the city, and also engage folks maybe who represent some of the communities that are newer to our community in a way that feels like a win-win, that there doesn't feel like there are losers?
Well, don't be afraid of the future. And if you actually look at this country, we're all immigrants. We all came here from somewhere else. And in Meridian, the demographics of Meridian have changed over the decades as new populations move into Meridian because of principally the healthcare system there draws doctors from all over the world into Meridian. So embrace that change. As we think about your palate, the foods you eat, you embrace lots of cultures with the foods you choose to eat, whether they're Asian foods or foods of Spanish origin or foods of Southern origin that you might eat further north. Our palate should be broad in the people we embrace as well, and the cultures that they bring and make us richer in doing so. As we age, we cannot become afraid of or fearful for change. And the good news is, certainly Rayla's generation, but my grandson's generation, they're so open to and think it's inviting when someone sounds a little differently than they do, as I probably sound to all of you, or look a little differently, worship a little differently. That's what makes the fabric of this life so enjoyable. Think how dull it would be if we all looked and sounded and believed the same.
John Robert, could you talk a little bit about Smart Growth America and how it partners, what that looks like when a community reaches out? We have, in our 6-county region, I know we serve 40 school districts. So I have a feeling that means there are probably at least 40 uniquely identified communities, ranging from very small to larger districts that might be graduating classes of 500-600 kids. If a community decides, they've got a mayor, they've got some community leaders, what does that look like when they begin to partner with or leverage some of the resources that are available through Smart Growth America to support their work as they're doing city planning or growth planning, et cetera?
So my work since I've been at Smart Growth America has taken me now to 129 different cities and towns of all sizes. From as large as Seattle and Boston down to Irwin, Tennessee, and even smaller. All cities share similar issues, different order of magnitude granted, and different order of resources available. But I've found that a small place with a determination to change and to adapt for the future can turn itself around much, much more quickly than a large metropolitan area. So the ways we engage is we provide technical assistance. You can work with us. We'll be in Woodstock, Illinois next week for 3 days in technical assistance there. And we don't bring the answer to you. What we do is we work with you to help you create your vision of your place, your special place, and tell that special story. We will do a financial analysis of where your money comes from, what it costs you to build that built environment, and where you're apt to get your best return for the investments you make. Because if you were a company making widgets, you would know how much it costs to make that widget so you could know what to sell it for. Cities, by and large, don't know what it costs for them to produce the things, the assets they provide for the public. But you have to know that cost, and then you know, we help you know where to invest that. And you can, because we want to see your investment leverage other economic development in the region or in the community, and take a neighborhood that has fallen on harder times and give it a much better shot at vibrancy by the investments you make there. So we do that all across the country. We also have the Champions Institute that Rayla leads, and I work with Rayla on the Champions Institute. That is for local elected officials, mayors, council members, county supervisors. They're chosen about 20 a year. It's funded by CDC. And we will work with them through a 6-month process of learning the important factors of the built environment and how they can leverage those. And we study other case studies. And then they have a project, which our current class is now beginning to implement their project. So as a part of it, you have to implement a project, whether that's a complete streets ordinance or actually putting in the bike lanes or actually making your crosswalks safer. And Oxford's, the project I showed you there was a project out of the Champions Institute. So there are many ways to engage with us, either fee for service through the Champions Institute or through a technical assistance program. And I would also want to mention to you that we provide advice to T-Mobile about reaching out to rural America. Now, I don't promote one form of internet connectivity or cell phone connectivity over the other, but they will provide a $50,000 grant to communities, and they provide 25 of them every quarter. So there are lots of opportunities. If you apply for a $50,000 grant, maybe it's to begin to transform a downtown space that was abandoned, but now you want to create a public space to be used. Maybe it's in your intersections, maybe it's the bike lanes, maybe it's a trail that will connect through your community, whatever it might be, you can apply. And we're part of the team that reviews those applications. But when you think about 25 every 3 months, and it will be going on for 5 years. There's lots of opportunity there.
So John Robert, am I hearing right that Smart Growth America can be a resource for a policy project to a very focused, like a street, a downtown, to something much bigger, like an entire community working on visioning for the future? I mean, so it can be very small or up to something very big, that's the range of your work?
Yes, absolutely. In our first Champions Institute, we had a very small community, Alma, Arkansas. They wanted a complete streets plan that was really a part of what they would develop as a larger strategic plan for the little downtown. So that was their project through the planning process to the point of having it passed by the city council so that it is now ordinance. We worked with Oxford, Mississippi on actually implementing that project that you saw there, and what Mayor Tannehill learned from the process transformed the plan she had originally made for that project. And then we worked with Houston, Texas on a sidewalk awareness, because in Houston, the sidewalk in front of your house belongs to you. So if it needs repair or an improvement, you, the property owner, has to pay for it. And that's not the case with the street in front of your house. So I would say a public access and right of way like a sidewalk should deserve the same treatment you get in a street. So we were helping Houston wrestle with that and showed them ways they could begin to move to a much more equitable sidewalk policy. for the future, because they'll never get to a walkable Houston based on the policies they have today. And so we work across that spectrum. And we want to work in a little place in West Virginia that has a 12-acre site downtown. It is so ripe for the right kind of investment and development that can turn that little community that has a lovely little downtown to a much more vibrant place. So I'm hoping we get to work there to help them craft the vision for that place, because they only get one chance to do it right in a generation.
Right. Say, a question, we're wondering if, without disclosing any trade secrets, if you'd be willing to share, aside from actually partnering with an organization like yours, what do you find to be some of the most effective ways for a community to, bring people together to create a vision or generate support for a municipal project?
Well, you have to include the voices in the room to begin with that are going to show up at the end of the process if they're not included up front. Mm-hmm. So your table of discussion has to be a very large table, and you want to purposefully reach out. You want your business community there, you want your chamber there, certainly the city and county elected officials, and we're not always blessed with visionaries in elected government. And if it's appropriate, you want the faith community there. You want to make sure that you also include the diversity that exists within the community. And that includes some new immigrants who may not feel comfortable being a part of the process unless you welcome them and say, I want to know. Because I can tell you, if you don't involve those voices in the beginning, they will show up at the council meeting with pitchforks at the end of the process. So let's hear the various and sometimes competing voices within the room, but you're driving towards a consensus. You're not driving towards unanimity. You're driving towards enough momentum and enough people around a vision to move forward. I wanted to hear all voices, but at the end of the day, we had a vision and we were going to move on that vision. And you cannot let a 10, 15, even 20% negative voice, which will always be with you, limit your vision.
Now, John Robert, there's a question about working across the river, and I'm not familiar enough with your location. Are you a river border city?
No.
Okay. Then we'll skip that one. How about keys for working with universities? I got a question about, can you say a little bit more about how you partnered with the university in your community?
Sure, but on the river subject, I point you to places like Chattanooga, Tennessee, that had turned their back on the Tennessee River there. It was the most polluted river in the country, and how they have taken out lanes of highway to connect their aquarium, which was their first big downtown project, to the river itself. So Huntington, West Virginia had turned its back on the river. We worked there so that they're now facing the river again. Those are assets that others don't have. So we didn't have the river. The university, you see, Mississippi State University isn't in Meridian. It's in Starkville, Mississippi, 90 miles away. But you can get to Meridian much more readily. And then we offered a space that's truly magical for them to have their conference center. So in working with the university, oftentimes universities consider themselves kingdoms unto themselves, and the city that surrounds them may be viewed more as a nuisance than a partner. But that takes interpersonal relationships. That takes in our case, getting to know the chancellor, getting to know the local deans at the community college, building personal relationships and trust, and the understanding that in Oxford's case, a successful University of Mississippi desperately needs a successful Oxford, and vice versa.
Mhm. Great, thanks. I just want to acknowledge that we ended up with quite a flurry of questions, and I know I didn't get to all of them, but I also want to thank Rayla, who has put a lot of information and resources in the chat. I realize that once we leave this gathering, you won't be able to see that chat anymore. So I'm looking at my colleagues, Angie and others, and hoping, committing, we will somehow capture that and include some of that on our site on the resources page, related to the recording of this session. So thanks very much, Rayla. Great to have you online supporting John Robert as he is on the fly responding to these questions.
Yeah, and
Just oh, go ahead. Yeah.
I'll say I saw a question here about most effective community engagement tools. Yeah, it's going to the churches. It's going to clubs like the Kiwanis Club and the Rotary Club. Make yourself, if you're an elected official, make yourself available at every opportunity to share a corporate vision, to seek their input. It's so very important to listen to your community, not just talk to them, but to listen to your community and validate their point of view and their concern.
Well, and I know, and there was one question, and maybe it was that same question, referencing back to our last speaker, who did talk about aesthetics, social offerings, welcoming, some of that stuff that feels maybe fluffy when you're making decisions about city planning. And so I think John Robert and Rayla, if there is good, it's always nice to have case studies and data, right? So the case studies you shared today were really compelling. It's nice to have for the number people, the numbers that go with about, annual spending on tourism downtown 10 years ago and now, and it's because we created this welcoming environment. So I think if you're able as well, either in chat or later, to maybe share some of that. I know there was a question about research on historic preservation as a tool for environmental sustainability. So as we're trying to make the cases about these linkages and how important and real they are, anytime that we can then share with our city council members, with our county board members, these case studies, this data, I think that makes it easier for folks who are working in communities large and small throughout the valley. So we'll really appreciate any help you can provide there.
Well, one thing we did was we kept track of building permits after we built Union Station. We kept track of the building permits. In Meridian, every dollar that we invested in building Union Station, which was $1.3 million, leveraged $187 an additional investment within 3 blocks of the structure. So for every dollar we put in on the public side, we were able to draw an additional $187 in private sector investment within that immediate downtown core. So those are numbers that are verifiable, provable, and they build the case for a wise investment, because I believe a city, it is a corporation, cities are incorporated, and the mayor, depending on the form of government, is the chief executive officer, and the council is your board of directors, and your investors are, whether willingly or not, are the citizens of that community. And I think you owe them a return on investment. And you need to be able to say, we'll invest this, here's what I believe the return will be, and we've studied that. And then, of course, if you can beat that return, then that's just so much the better for you.
That's fantastic. Thank you. I think 187% is an ROI we'd love to see with our own foundation invested philanthropic assets and our retirement assets. So yeah, that's impressive and really reinforces the importance of, for the folks who want the numbers, make sure you can get them the numbers and have the backup to substantiate them. So thanks.
And the question about Meridian facing the river, we aren't on a literal river, but the interstate highway acts as much like a river. It's something you have to get across to get to the other side of Meridian or to get to Alabama. And we greatly encouraged the people of Alabama to be engaged and embrace Meridian as an entrance point to what is, it's called the Black Belt of Alabama. It's a very poor part of the state of Alabama. And I would be in the downtown, and it would be coming on election time, and a couple would come up and say, "Oh, Mayor, we're pulling for you, we're pulling for you." And I'd say, "Well, now remember to vote on such and such a date." And they'd say, "Oh, we can't vote. We're from Alabama." But they understood that for them to have a more vibrant life, Meridian had to succeed.
Yeah, well, thank you. That's a great message for those of us who look at the river that divides our region and our two states. We are working to see it as a connector as opposed to a divider. So we are out of time. It has been so nice to have this time for back and forth. Thank you so much, John Robert Smith. Thanks to all of you for being here. Thanks to our partner and sponsor, First State Bank and Trust. And a special thanks to the St. Croix Valley Foundation staff team and my colleague, Angie Pilgrim, our Director of Community Impact, for her leadership of this program and all of our convening work. I get to have the spotlight and welcome you while they are doing all the hard work behind the scenes. So thanks to all of them. We hope you will join us for the next program in this year's placemaking series, Wednesday, March 9th. We will be focusing on one of the other factors that contributes to attachment to place, being an open and welcoming community. So we'll have a panel with representatives from U of M Extension and from the International Institute of Minnesota, really talking with us, helping us better understand the importance of a welcoming community and sharing some resources that may help us as we are working to make our Valley communities more welcoming. Registration will open on Monday at scvfoundation.org. And as we mentioned earlier, you can also find on our site some of the resources that our speakers have provided or suggested, as well as recordings of this and previous conversations of the Valley. So feel free to share that link and those recordings with friends and other folks with whom you are working. Finally, we will be sending an email with a brief survey to everyone who registered for today's program. I thank you in advance for taking just a few minutes to respond to that survey. Your feedback really does help inform planning for future programming. So thank you for your feedback. Thank you again for being part of these important conversations. I look forward to seeing you virtually again in March. Take care.